So as a logical progression, next we're going to talk about the transition stage of group. So as I mentioned, there are 4 stages we're going to focus on. So let's start there. In terms of learning objectives, we're going to describe the dynamics associated with the group process and development. We're going to identify and understand key characteristics of the group during the transition stage. We're going to explore ways of effectively dealing with defensiveness and reluctant behavior. We will critically evaluate the notion of reluctance. We'll talk about some common fears and anxiety of members during the transition stage. And, I'd like to compare and contrast at the different points in group to think about it, right? We're going to gain a greater appreciation or deeper appreciation for how to explore conflict. We're going to talk about effective and ineffective confrontation styles. And I touched upon this in a previous video as well about avoiding aggressive confrontation. And we're going to think about how to therapeutically address problematic behaviors. Now, we're also going to try and conceptualize, well, why is the person doing what they're doing? So trying to understand the dynamics of a person's problematic behavior is also going to be important. We'll describe the behaviors which indicate avoidance by the group. We'll understand the dynamics of transference and countertransference. I touched upon this briefly in the theories lecture. And we're going to talk about issues of co-leadership during the transition stage. All right. So let's start by way of introduction. There is an unwillingness to disclose ways that people are struggling, right? And when a person doesn't feel comfortable disclosing what they're experiencing, that might keep that individual from growing, and it might also keep the members of the group from growing. So there is an internal struggle that happens, which is normal, right? We talked about in the initial stage, people are developing trust, but now they're starting to identify things that they want to say or they want to take a risk, but they're struggling at this point. But their lack of participation could actually hold them and the group back. So during the transition phase, this is where a lot of the patterns of problematic behavior start to emerge, because we're going to see a little bit more risk-taking than in the first stage, the initial stage. Now you're going to start to see some problematic behavior emerge. Anxiety and defensiveness are common, right? So people are still uncertain where they fit in. They're still trying to figure out how to express themselves. So there is still some anxiety, but also defensiveness, because what's interesting is now some people are starting to share, but if they share something about you could be threatened by it, right? So there could be some defensiveness that emerges as well to protect oneself from criticism. Now, the group members themselves, they oftentimes are trying to test the leader and test other members to determine how safe the environment is. So you may not know you're being tested, but a person might say, comment and just watch. And I said in a previous video that it's possible that if the members or the group leader react in an adverse way, that person determines that this is an unsafe environment. They're torn, there's ambivalence in terms of emotions, whether to play it safe or whether to take a risk. And remember I said people open up at different speeds. So there is going to be a dance that happens during the transition stage. We are also starting to see the members are evaluating the group leader to see if they are trustworthy. Now, a trustworthy leader is someone who is consistent, reliable, dependable, allows things to go up to a certain point, but if it becomes unsafe, they engage in blocking, right? So that it doesn't go too far. And now they're already starting to learn how to express themselves, right? In the beginning, there was anxiety about expressing oneself, but now they're starting to try and express themselves in a way that other people will listen. So there are a lot of thoughts around that. So how do you gauge whether trust has been established, right? I said in the initial stage, the goal is to establish trust. You can determine that there's a low level of trust, potentially, I don't want to say guaranteed, but potentially you could see there's a lack of trust based on attendance. So if people are showing up late, people are leaving early, people are missing sessions.
And welcome back to this U.S. Open office plan.
Miller just lobbed a message way over Jones's head using some technical jargon.
That's an indicator. If people are reluctant to participate, pardon me, the spelling mistake, due to their fear of being confronted. So if you're not participating because you don't want to be confronted, then you don't feel trust in the group. If you're not willing to identify and initiate any meaningful work, so if there's a homework assignment that is given to the group and then we bring it back to the group and an individual doesn't do it, that might be an indicator of low trust in the group or the group process. Denial is an issue. So denial of problems or concerns could be based on fear or lack of trust. They might over-intellectualize. Instead of talking about how they feel, they may talk about what they're thinking and make broad or general global statements. This is a way of demonstrating lack of trust, right? So if you trust the group and you trust the leader, you can be more specific about your personal experience, right? So hiding behind global statements and intellectualizations doesn't help. Now, if you don't, again, every group is going to have conflict. Conflict is supposed to be part of the group process. With conflict comes intimacy. You're going to grow. But if a person is unwilling to deal with conflict in a group, that also could be an indicator that there's a lack of trust in the group. Now, what are some of the fears that emerge at this point? Well, there's a fear of making a fool of oneself. Again, that is pretty similar to what we said in the initial stage. There might be a sense of emptiness or void that emerged. That's new. A sense of losing control, feeling that they're going to lose control over what they say. They're going to blurt something out that's inappropriate or harmful. Or they might be overly emotional. They might be afraid of that. They might be afraid to self-disclose, right? Therapy is a unique experience where you're encouraged to share in such a deep and vulnerable way. So there could be a fear of self-disclosure as a whole. And then people who are sharing, they could fear monopolization. They might be afraid that they might monopolize the group's time. So they might be afraid they're taking too much of the group's time. We also have fears of being judged, challenged, singled out, or rejected, right? So some of these are consistent with the initial stages of groups, such as being judged or rejected. But being challenged or singled out is a new fear because as people start to speak up and speak out, there can be some criticism thrown in many different directions. And that's okay. That's supposed to happen, right? Now, if you're going to offer constructive criticism, if you're going to offer confrontation, right? So it has to be caring confrontation, not aggressive confrontation. And we talked about caring confrontation and aggressive confrontation in previous lectures. But here are some general rules, right? So one is you should have a clear rationale why you're confronting a person, right? So it has to have a purpose, and if it doesn't have a function, then you shouldn't criticize it. To criticize a person or confront a person for the sake of being critical is not useful. If you're criticizing with the rationale that you notice a functional problem, they're not performing up to their potential, or there's some kind of challenge related to that, then confront them, right? But we typically should only confront people that we care about, right? So confrontation brings intimacy, brings closeness. So you confront a person from a position of care and concern. When you're confronting a person, make sure you focus on your experience rather than the other person. It's very important to say, my experience with what is happening is ... So when you say my experience with what's happening is ... you're not saying it's the truth. You're saying it's your personal experience. You're also giving space for that person to say, well, no, that's not what it was meant. That, I see it a different way, or whatever it is. So you're avoiding dogmatic statements and judgment. Now, dogma is fixed statements or set statements that are unchangeable, and you're avoiding judgments about the other person. So when you keep it on you, it allows that person to process that a little bit better. And it also, it's very important to give space for that person to reflect on what you said, whether it be in that session or another session. Now, if there is a caring confrontation that happens, if you're the group leader, my recommendation is that you invite the person who received the criticism to weigh in. So if I said my experience with what's happening is that you seem to be avoiding addressing your thesis. Okay, let's say that was my statement. It's a criticism. It's a criticism. It's my experience. Doesn't have to be true. But as a group leader, I would go to you and say, well, Dan said he experienced your answers in a way that you're avoiding dealing with your thesis. What's your point of view? What's your take on this? And if you're open to sharing, I would love to hear it. If you want to think about it more, feel free to bring it up either later in the session or the next session. And that gives that person time to process. Now, some people are going to have a natural reaction right away, and they're going to be able to weigh in. But for some people, especially deep thinkers, they want to spend a decent amount of time reflecting on what you said. And even in a moment, if they were defensive, right?
If it's worth showing off, it's worth protecting. Add tech coverage to your USAA renter's insurance and help protect your electronics from
long term. They might say, yeah, you got it right, if it were true. Now, so what do you do with difficult behaviors of members? So if a member is engaging in a process that derails the growth of the group? Well, one thing I can tell you is don't respond to them sarcastically. And I actually have had an experience like this where I was guilty of engaging in sarcasm incorrectly. I was young and naive, but it doesn't solve the problem, right? So, and it creates a vulnerability there. So avoid sarcasm as much as possible. You want to encourage members to explore their defensiveness. So if a person has a strong reaction, you can describe it, right? So you can say, hey, it appears to me that what I said, hits home. Can you talk about the reaction you're having now? So that invites the person to explore whatever defensiveness they might be experiencing. Notice how I said it. It appears to me that you might be having a strong reaction. So you're stating your observations, but in a very tentative way. It's so important not to engage in those dogmatic statements, right? So always speak, is it possible, maybe, my experience is that. All of these things are tentative, right? And if a conflict emerges in the group, it's important for you to process that and try not to avoid or retreat from it, because avoiding the problem or retreating from the problem doesn't make the problem go away. In fact, it lingers not just in that person who's engaging in a difficult behavior in their mind, but all the members of the group. They're left to draw their own conclusions about what's up with that conflict. So you definitely want to explore it. You definitely want to process it. You don't want to retreat from it. And, as members of a group or as a leader of a group, people are they're trying to test the limit. So if they challenge you, or they don't agree with you, or they push back, don't personalize it. It's okay to give people space to experience their emotions. It reminds me, I have 2 kids, and my son used to, whenever there was a form of discipline, I would take away, let's say, his video games or his Nerf gun or whatever it is, he would cry. And as a parent, it hurts to see your kid cry, even if you needed to discipline them, right? So, I remember, I'll share one story about the Nerf gun. My son he had a Nerf gun, and he was playing with his sister, or he was, dare I say, using her as target practice. She wasn't playing. And he shot his sister with a Nerf gun. And she's like, Abba, Shalom shot me with a Nerf gun, right? So she told on her brother and said he shot her. And I was like, Shalom, please don't shoot your sister with the Nerf gun. He's like, okay. 5 minutes later, pop. Abba, he did it again. By the way, Abba is father or daddy in Hebrew. So I said, Shalom, don't shoot your sister. This is the second time. If you shoot her again, I'm taking your Nerf guns, I'm locking them away, and you won't see them until tomorrow. So here I am being an assertive parent, being stern, right? But you know what he did? As any kid would, trying to test the limits, he shoots her a 3rd time. And at that point, I took away his Nerf guns, I locked them away, and he started to cry. And that's a normal reaction too. He started to cry and cry and cry. And, instead of giving him back his Nerf guns because he was crying, or personalizing the fact that I might have made him upset, in reality, it was his actions that resulted in that consequence, right? So from a behavior point of view, that was a natural consequence to his behavior. So I didn't personalize it. And I allowed him to feel what he feels. And I said to him, I said, you know what, Shalom? It's okay to cry. Crying, it means that you're feeling an emotion and you're sad. And do you want to talk about it, or what are you sad about? I want my Nerf guns back. You took away my Nerf guns. This is what he says. I'm like, okay, I understand. So you're sad that you lost your Nerf gun, right? Yeah.
A Verbo is for sharing all kinds of moments. From post-concert bliss.
And I said, well, why did you lose your Nerf gun, right? And he said, well, I shot my sister. Well, did you have any warnings to stop? Yeah. And now what happened? Well, I lost my Nerf gun. And I say, you know, unfortunately, I can't give it back to you today because this is the punishment for the behavior. But, you know, I understand your sadness. It's okay to be sad. And he cried a little bit and then he went on to play. But so if I would have personalized his reaction as a parent, then I might have given in, because no parent wants to see their kid cry. It hurts to see kids cry. But I didn't, because I understood that even if he said you're mean, or I guess all kids at one time say I hate you. He didn't in this case, but kids can say I hate you. Don't take it personally, because that's them processing their emotions. And the same thing as a group leader, people might challenge you as a group leader or suggest that there's a better way to do things. But your job is not to take it personal, right? So avoid personalizing members' reactions. So what are some problematic styles of behaving in a group? Now, you'll notice the way I'm phrasing this, I'm trying to avoid labeling the person. It's not the person is problematic. There's problematic styles of behavior. So, silence. So silence is a problem where you have the lack of sharing, monopolizing or monopolistic behavior. So monopolistic behavior is when one person speaks to everything. I'm sure you've been in classes where a teacher asks a question and one person keeps raising their hand and answering. That's fine, but we want to spread the wealth, so to speak, in a classroom. Same thing in a group. You want to make sure that everybody who wants to share has the opportunity to share. Storytelling. I would say storytelling can be useful. It can be problematic as well. But if the storytelling is meant to avoid addressing the question being posed to an individual, that kind of storytelling is problematic. But if you're telling a story to help connect with another individual, that storytelling is fine. Questioning. So it's okay to question. But if a person is always why, well, that's not right, always challenging, then it can actually demoralize the group. Giving advice. And it's interesting that each of these, at one point or another, might actually be okay, but ongoing, it becomes a problem. People need to use therapy as a source of self-discovery. So telling people what to do or giving them advice isn't really helping them. Fostering a sense of dependency where a person says, oh, I didn't make a decision because I needed to run it by the group. I need you guys, right? It's okay to want to be part of the group, but feel community within the group, but sometimes it's important to make decisions. Offering pseudo support, giving fake empathy, right? I know what you're going through when you don't. Or hostility or acting superior. are socializing. So when people are talking to each other in the middle of the group or subgrouping outside of the group, that can be a problem. Intellectualizing. So intellectualizing is to, instead of talking about thoughts and emotions, being overly logical in a way that they avoid having to deal with their feelings, could be a problematic style. Members become assistant leaders. There are some people who feel a need due to anxiety to play the role of the hero, or in the vacancy of a leader to become the leader. There is a feeling of a void, but so members might want to assist as a second group leader, and that's not helpful. That could be a problem. Or they might be doing it to please you. So you have to explore motivation behind that. So now in terms of defensiveness, so we also have to think about how do we handle defensive behavior in a therapeutic way, right? So it's okay for defensiveness to be there. I encourage you not to fight defensiveness.
How's it going?
If a person is experiencing defensiveness, you can
Right now.
gently challenge them, gently encourage them, gently push them in a way to explore what they're defensive about rather than trying to fight them. And the worst thing you could say is, oh, you're just being defensive. Labeling it as defensiveness, albeit true, does not make a person less defensive. It actually makes them dig in further. So, the leader's response should provide encouragement for members to say more rather than stopping at the initial point of resistance, right? So, tell me more about that. Tell me more. I have a partial understanding of what you're saying, but help me see this a little more clearly, right? So now you're encouraging them, to move a little bit further away from the defensiveness. And if you're gonna do it, questions should be in an open-ended fashion. True or false, you're being defensive. Not a good question. You can say, I'm noticing, I'm sensing a level of discomfort right now. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? So now you're reflecting on the defensiveness, but in an invitational manner, right? There are ways to do this. So, what do you do when the whole group shuts down or it appears to shut down? So if a whole group is engaging in avoidance, not dealing with the issues. So if a whole group chooses to shut down or engage in hidden agendas, you have to address it. So, as a group leader, at that point, if it's one person, you can give them their space, but if the whole group has shut down or is acting on hidden agendas, you may have lost the group. So as a group leader, you might acknowledge what you're seeing. It appears that the group isn't looking to work on this issue. So what might be going on? Can anyone have any thoughts as to why we haven't been able to do X, Y, Z? That kind of question will allow you to bring hidden agendas to the surface. And you'll be amazed at what can come to the surface, because not every group results in a working group. Don't give up on the group. It's not hopeless, You can go in periods of ruts. Sometimes things plateau, especially if you have these long-term groups, and they're open where you can just talk about anything. You could definitely see plateau moments or avoidance. So don't give up. Also, you do not indulge feelings of frustration and annoyance. So, if they shut down, they shut down for a reason. If they're acting on hidden agendas, maybe the hidden agenda is more important than the actual agenda that you set forth. So if you act on frustration and annoyance, it definitely won't address it.
Hey, Grant Cardone here, and we have sold out the 10X Growth Conference and done it in record time.
Now, transference and countertransference, again, transference, you start to see some of this in the transition stage, where clients start to project their feelings onto the therapist, even though it's rooted in that member's past behavior, past experiences, or past relationships, whether it be a parent or whatnot. You also have countertransference. You can start to see potential over-identification by a therapist onto some of the group members, so they can project their unresolved conflict on the clients as well. And that actually can be damaging. It can be damaging to the member themselves, especially if it's a negative countertransference. But even if it's a positive countertransference, it can be damaging because you might engage in an enabling behavior and give them a pass that you wouldn't give another person. And then the other members of the group might also see that person either being treated as a mascot preferentially or as a scapegoat in a negative way. So you want to avoid that. You can have multiple transferences in a group, obviously, right? Because there are multiple people. So pay attention to how you react to the group leader as well as everyone in the group. That's going to be important. Now, in terms of co-leader issues, so you have to be careful with negative reactions towards one leader, right? So if there's negative reactions towards one leader, you have to explore what that's about. And the other co-leader has to strategize on how to deal with that and be in one place. It's sort of like parenting. You have two parents. It's easy to split the parents and make one the good cop, one the bad cop.
You don't have no pins?
And pit them against one another.
Tell them.
Co-leadership has the same issue that you can pit one leader against the other. But you can also have challenges posed to both leaders, right? So if you have co-leaders, maybe, that individual who is acting in either a defensive, antagonistic way or acting on their hidden agendas, they could lash out on both leaders. It's possible, right? It doesn't have to be just one. So you have to think about that and monitor it. That's going to start to happen in a transition stage, right? It isn't as much in the initial stage because they're still on their best behavior, still trying to figure out where they fit in. You also have to deal with the problem behaviors that we listed earlier in the lecture. You have to deal with them. You can't avoid them. Deal with them kindly, gently, and with invitations, but you still have to address it. And if there are issues with countertransference and their co-leaders, it's the job of the co-leader, co-facilitator who's not engaging in countertransference to talk to the other leader. All right. So the member functions. What's the member's function?
I do.
This is your job in the transition stage. Your job is to recognize and express any persistent reactions, right? And we notice how this sounds very similar to the initial stage. We want you to, commit to sharing any kind of persistent feelings you might be having. And that is an indicator of trust, but unexpressed feelings is an indicator of distrust. You also want to pay attention to your defenses, right? So if you're feeling defensive about something, honor that. You can even talk to the group, this issue has me feeling a little defensive, but I recognize that I'm being defensive and I want to work on that, right? So you don't have to force change overnight. You can honor your feelings, even if it's defensiveness,
Maybe you should.
right? So you want to move from dependence and what should I do and being told by either the group members or group leaders how you should function to behaving in more of an independent fashion. You also need to learn how to confront people in a constructive manner. We talked a little bit about confrontation. There's nothing wrong with confronting one another as long as you have a clear rationale, you have their best interest in mind, you're doing it in a tentative way, and you invite them to consider your thoughts, right? These are perfectly fine. This is constructive criticism. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, you have to work through conflicts, go through that fire. It's an uncomfortable fire, but you have to go through the conflict rather than remaining silent, right? So avoid silence because silence means you shut down, and also avoid subgrouping outside of sessions where just a couple of you band together to talk, right? That's not helpful to anyone. If you needed to subgroup or you happen to subgroup, one of the things that I always ask people to do is acknowledge that they subgrouped in the next session and bring it back to the group. Even though it shouldn't happen, it sometimes happens. So no one's going to begrudge you. So talking about subgrouping. Now, as a leader, it's our job to teach members the value of dealing fully with conflict. So it seems like confrontation and conflict, they're like bad words, but they're not. So you have to teach them. You also have to assist members in recognizing their own defensive patterns. So if that happens and you notice it, as I said earlier, I'm noticing you seem a little bit uncomfortable with what we're discussing today. Do you want to talk about that? Things like that. You can do that, right?
I need marching band.
Teach people to honor their anxiety. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with anxiety. Fear and anxiety have an adaptive function. If it wasn't adaptive, then we wouldn't have it. So it protects us in evolution. Fear usually signals danger. So there's okay with experiencing fear and anxiety. There's okay with experiencing defensiveness, but it's our job to encourage you to work towards addressing these issues in a meaningful way, because they do serve as a form of self-protection. Sort of like a turtle response. You go in your shell to protect yourself. You also want to, as a leader, model both directly and tactfully how to challenge members, show how to challenge members, because people may not do it right away. What I've observed in running groups is that after a few sessions, people start to use my language, right? So and that's okay, because that means the modeling process worked. We also see that it's important to encourage members to express reactions in the here and now, right? So getting historical or hysterical is not helpful. And that, in a nutshell, is the transition stage of group therapy. So I'm going to stop there. Till next time, everybody.
Join Planet Fitness and get energized with fitness that fits your budget. Deal ends April 12th.
Switch to H&R Block and don't get hit with any surprise fees. Come out on top this year.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the group therapy course. In this...
Oh, you guys are writing a rough draft of your paper due on I guess Wednesday, because I wanted you to start on it now. It could just be an outline or your first draft of your paper. It's at the end of the syllabus. There's actually a whole outline at the end of the syllabus, and you'd fill in the blank. What group are you creating? What funding source are you getting to pay for you to work your group on grants.gov? And then how will you recruit people? How many weeks will you run it? They're usually 10 or 12 weeks. And then the meat of the group, which you could also cite Girl Circle for that. So that's the gist of it. Hopefully that, how many pages needs, like I said, it's just a rough outline, and it's so you guys don't wait till the last minute to turn your shit in on May 1st. So as long as you got something, you're fine. Let me see what time you sent that. Hopefully that answers all your all's questions. Feel free to email me with anything. I'm running to my private practice at 1:51 and talking with Nikita about our accreditation material on the drive down. So it's another crazy week, April Fool's Day. See ya.